Welcome back to Inside the Game with CNHI Sports. I'm George Bremer of CNHI Sports Indiana. We're going to go around the country to catch you up on some of the biggest headlines. Let's start in Boston with Bill Burt. And now checking in with Bill Burt. And Bill, it's been an interesting offseason throughout the league. Once again, no uniformity this spring from one team to the next. I know in Indianapolis there were 2 weeks of voluntary work in May, and then they've got about 2 months off before training camp, skipped the mandatory minicamp altogether. The Patriots were one of the teams that tried to stick closer to normal, did the voluntary work, had the mandatory minicamp, going to have about a month before training camp. Participation was high in some spots, low in other spots. I know the union had some questions, and there were some battles back and forth there. How do you think this all plays out now as we get ready for training camps beginning at the end of next month?
Absolutely. So I honestly was coming in saying, why does the NFL just go full bore? Get like mini camps, open up the locker rooms, off-season workouts, and then all of a sudden we have what happened in the College World Series with North Carolina State. 8 players testing positive. It looks like none of them are sick, but they tested positive. So it's like we're not past this yet. So I think the NFL, based on what happened there, this is scary because this could blow up another week or two. And the NFL does not want to do, like last year was a different year. Last year, we sort of said, all right, you know what? There's going to be games. They're going to be moved. Accept it. I think this year, because the stadiums are probably going to be full, basically. And but I think we're going to see the disconnect between media and players, fans and players. It's still going to continue. We're still going to have COVID checks. We're going to have to go in before we go to a game. That being said, I'm hoping, and I will say this, the Patriots had a mandatory minicamp. And I will tell you, for the Patriots, that was vital. Because their minicamp, even the guys that aren't wearing pads, it's more situational football. It's where they had they had literally 3 quarterbacks, and you get to see them under some duress. And quick, get out there. 4 minutes to go in the game. No timeouts left. Run the team. And they did a lot of that during this minicamp. And that's really what Belichick does. I remember I did a story at the Super Bowl a couple of years ago on Reggie Wayne talking about his 11 days. He was with the Patriots for 11 days in camp, and ended up was released. But he said, these guys are working on stuff that other teams aren't working on until sometimes October, November. And it's so that for the Patriots, what happened was ideal. And they did run the camp. There were a couple players not there. Stephon Gilmore was one of them. Basically, the rest of the team was there. Very important because the Patriots had so many new players, so many key new players. Remember all the free agents they signed, 10 free agents when free agency opened. So for me, I believe this is very, very important. We didn't have it last year. We had players coming in sort of cold. We had young players coming into a season cold and basically learning on the job, which is what we talked about last year. Teams with quarterbacks, teams with coaches, teams with veterans, they're going to be the better teams. And lo and behold, we got a Super Bowl with Brady and the best two quarter, him and Patrick Mahomes. So I think this is a big deal. If you weren't able to do a mini camp, I think it could play a role in it so much that it slows down what's going to happen in August a little bit. I remember we're going to have less games now, more games during the regular season. So I believe this is going to be as close to what we're going to see, but it's this is what happened, I think, with the College World Series. I think really sort of changes exactly what they were going to do. I think it was going to be a little more open, and I think that scared a lot of people.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt that opened a lot of eyes. And I know there was a hockey coach. I think that the Canadiens coach was out for a while. And obviously Chris Paul missed a couple of games at the beginning of the Western Conference Finals. So there's still some things out there to deal with. I think the NFL definitely trying to navigate that the best as it can. I think it's interesting. You mentioned the kind of the disconnect with the fans. One of the policy that I saw, and I think it's league-wide, I know it's definitely going to happen here. If you have fans at training camp, they have to be 20 feet away at all times. So no autographs, none of that kind of fun, intermingling that goes on during training camp. But I do think it's going to feel more like normal, having the crowds there. Last year was so weird. A big play would happen in training camp, and there's no noise. Nobody's responding. Do you think, in some ways, at least, we're taking steps back? It's going to feel a little more like normal now.
Well, look, I go back to the College World Series. I watched the game last night. It was amazing. Every seat was packed, and Mississippi State fans are crazy, but it was fun. And we saw at Fenway Park. Yankees were in town last week, and it was like the old days. So I think, again, the NFL is very, very strict, and the NFLPA, I don't know. I don't want to say they're stronger than most, but they've had a bigger say the last few years, and players are listening to them. So I think we're still going to see some rules in the NFL. And like I said, that little separation, and I think it's going to happen with the media, which I don't like. Hopefully, maybe that maybe is extended, not extended, but ended. And we can. It's just better. Me personally, I'm a one-on-one guy. I like interviewing one-on-one. I go to those big press conferences. I'll go to a pool. There's 8 or 9 reporters, 15 reporters are on a player, and you have to do your job. But that's preferably not what I like to do. So it's going to be interesting. I believe for the Patriots, and I'm speaking for. I think this offseason was as good as they could have expected based on what happened, and I believe a year ago they needed they need more one-on-one contact to do what they do in New England, and they got it this year. And some teams, like the Colts, in some ways didn't get it. So I believe that some teams, this is it's gonna play a little bit of a role. I'm not saying it's gonna mean Super Bowl or not, but it could mean a win or two in preparation, especially early in the season.
No, I absolutely think it's going to be one of the interesting things to watch. There's so many variables going into this season. It sounds like you're going to have one set of rules for players who are vaccinated, one set of rules for players who are not vaccinated, and teams are going to have to navigate that, depending on what their percentage is. Although I think because of that, I think you're going to see more teams get closer to that 85% threshold, just because I think when guys come into training camp and they see that their teammates are allowed to do things they're not allowed to do, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There's going to definitely be holdouts. It's absolutely an individual choice. But I think when you're looking at the other side of the room and those guys are eating together and practicing without masks, I think that's going to be a factor. But I think this spring is an underrated thing. People are talking about the vaccination thing. I think it's going to be interesting. The teams that spent more time together this spring, like you said, they're going to get a faster start in training camp. They might be a little bit further ahead than the teams that didn't.
Listen, football is a different sport. There's, the staffs are bigger. There's really during camp and during offseason, we're talking 70 to 80 players. There's a lot of film work, a lot of study halls, and it's imperative. Football is unlike any other sport. You need 11 guys on the same page, not 1 or 2 where LeBron can dribble the ball, or even in hockey, one line. No, it's not like that in the NFL. One player can blow up a play, and often does. So I think that's very important. I think we're close to being somewhat normal, but it's not exactly normal yet.
Yeah, no, we still got a little ways to go. We're in the red zone. We haven't scored yet. I think we're getting in that neighborhood. As I look at training camp coming up, does it feel like you said, there's going to be a disconnect? The media, we're going to feel it. You're probably not going to be in the locker room for sure, and it's going to be a while till those things come back. But does it feel like having a training camp, having 3 preseason games, at least there's a step here towards something we recognize as the NFL of old?
Yes, but I will say, it'll feel really normal if because what's happened in the NFL, Patriots are one of the first teams to do it, but they bring in other teams for camps before you play an exhibition game, and those are pressure packed. Jacksonville was here a few years ago, and that was the year they pushed the Patriots. It was just intense competition, and the fans got to see it. The media got to see it, and that's like real. That's real. And the best part about camp is, and you said it, you get like 10, 15, 20, maybe that's a little bit, but 10,000 fans. It's hot. It's always in the 90s, high 80s. But you see these guys in person and you start to go, okay, we're almost here. And I think that's really what happens. The NFL, look, let's be honest. It's a 12-month-a-year sport. And the training camp And really, beginning of August is when it's okay. Football is actually here, and you can see players, and we can see who's hot. We can see who's dropping the balls. We can see which quarterback's throwing it over guys a little bit. So that's when honestly, it's like that's when we'll know. And you'll see the teams. You'll see the Colts. You'll see the Patriots. Maybe a little sharper than they were at the beginning of September. We'll see it a little sharper in August. So that for me is the best part. They need this offseason, and it wasn't perfect, but they needed this as much as anybody. And I think the NFL is going to be better for it.
Yeah, I think it's going to show up in September throughout the league. So thanks a lot for your time again, Bill. We'll talk to you again here in a couple of weeks.
All right, thanks. Best to the family.
Thanks as always to Bill. You can follow his coverage of the New England Patriots on Twitter at Burt Talks Sports. You can follow me and the Indianapolis Colts at GM Bremer. Now let's go get a college perspective. Check in with Big Ten Country with Elton Hayes and Kevin Brockway. Welcome in our college sports experts, Kevin Brockway and Elton Hayes. And guys, big news right now out there nationally, name, image, and likeness. Of course, the NCAA moving this week. They knew they kind of had this hard deadline all along on Thursday. They've known that for months with, I think, 10 states coming in with their own legislation. Now the NCAA is at least putting some kind of structure in place. It's still chaos, and it's probably going to be for a little while. But, Kevin, how much has this changed the landscape?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The Board of Governors today is going to approve basically rubber stamp for states that don't have NIL legislation like Indiana, basically a chance to set their own policy. And I think Indiana also on Monday announced a partnership with Altrius, which is a sports marketing company designed to help monetize athletes at Indiana, in terms of this NIL legislation. And it's going to be fascinating. I guess one of the interesting aspects is Twitter, and apparently you can do ads. I think it's $100 an ad for 10 ads for any athlete that has a Twitter following over 10,000. So Trace Jackson Davis is the highest athlete at IU at 21,500. I'm sure he'll do fine. But pretty amazing, you think about it, and this just shows you how much of a basketball state Indiana is compared to football. Michael Penix doesn't have 10,000 followers on Twitter, only 8,500 for a guy that's arguably the second most popular athlete at IU, but still a football state for sure, still a basketball state for sure, excuse me.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case here in Indiana. What's the state of play in Pennsylvania, Elton? How are things going at Penn State as far as NIL goes?
Penn State, I reached out to Penn State. Funny, asked for a comment yesterday. I'm working on a story on how it's going to impact Penn State athletes, so waiting to hear back. One of the things that athletic director Sandy Barber had mentioned when we spoke with her a while back was Penn State has the largest alumni network in the country. It's something that the school prides itself on, that they love toting that number out there. And it's going to be interesting to see, how that falls into the NIL debate, capitalizing on all that alumni, different alumni from different walks of life might want to, sponsor some of these athletes. What's interesting is, we know football is king here at Penn State, but Penn State hockey is huge. Penn State women's volleyball is big. So it's going to be, I know everyone's talking about football and basketball, but I'm interested to see how sports like hockey or women's volleyball here, so if some of these athletes are able to capitalize off of this, and some of the niche sports. But I think it's interesting. It's a new day for college athletics. It's something that the NCAA has long worked against. I think they see the writings on the wall, and it's going to be a little crazy at first with everyone trying to implement all these things and get things the ball rolling. But I'm interested in. I think it's long overdue. I think the athletes have put themselves in this position, and why not give them a chance to. In the words of Brett Kavanaugh of the Supreme Court, it's un-American. That's about as I can put it.
Yeah, no, that was a pretty strongly worded opinion when that came down. I know that spurred a lot of this NCAA action. We had heard for a couple months now, or at least a couple weeks now, some quarterbacks in Georgia maybe we're setting up some deals with sporting goods stores, and some of the states that had that legislation ready. You saw some of their athletes already starting to strike deals. They were going to be announced, later this week. It was interesting in Big Ten country, Kevin. Wisconsin quarterback Graham Mertz apparently is trademarking his own logo.
Yeah, he's got like a Tiger Woods logo, a GM logo. So it's pretty it's pretty amazing what some of these athletes are thinking of. Christian Lander just posted a Twitter post. Hey, I'm open for business. The same with Logan Duncombe. So yeah, you're going to see a lot of these guys are tremendously savvy in terms of how they're going to go about it and how they're going to go about trying to make a little bit of extra money off their image and likeness. The market will be fascinating to see, like how much money these athletes can actually make, because there's only, there's a lot of local businesses, there's a lot of national businesses, and you talk about the alumni network at Penn State, Elton, but I think the other thing too is, how are they going to police something that's connected to the school, where it's a recruiting advantage? That's the other thing too, and they're trying to police that, but I don't know how they can. I think, there's going to be loopholes. People are going to be pretty sneaky here, and they're going to find ways to attract athletes or show that they can, get the most money to athletes possible so that they can, get future recruits and get better recruiting classes down the road.
One thing that I wonder, and Elton, this is really, to me, particularly interesting in a state like Pennsylvania. You've got Pittsburgh, one of the bigger schools in the state, but the athletes there are obviously going to be competing with the Pirates, with the Steelers, with the Panthers. It's a different kind of state of play there than at Penn State, where in State College, the Nittany Lions are the show. Do you think there will be an advantage at all for schools? You look at a lot of the Big Ten country, with the exception of maybe Northwestern, who's in Chicago. Most of these are college town settings. You don't have a lot of big cities where they're competing with pro athletes for the same kind of possibilities. Do you think that will play a difference across the country?
I think that's a great point you bring up that, frankly, I hadn't really considered before, but you're right. Pittsburgh is overshadowed by the Penguins, the Pirates, the Steelers. So a lot of those, the attendance isn't as high as some of those, the popularity of those events. Villanova is over there outside of Philadelphia. Villanova basketball has a good following, but it still can't hold a candle compared to the 76ers, the Eagles, or the Flyers. But you look in State College, this is it. Penn State is the only show in town. In Tuscaloosa, Alabama, that is the only. You look at those southern states, and there are a lot of those, like Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas. There aren't any pro sports in those areas, so those athletes are essentially pro athletes. So I think that's a good point. I think that does give an advantage to athletes in towns like State College and maybe Bloomington or teams like that.
I do think you can make the counter argument, though, that because those are in smaller towns, you have smaller businesses. Whereas if you're in a big city, there's more business opportunity. There's more opportunity to reach out to businesses and bigger businesses that might be able to pay more because you have bigger corporations in some of these cities. Like Atlanta has like Delta, they have Coca-Cola. So what if you're a Georgia Tech athlete? You might be able to reach out and tap into some of those major markets or major corporations better than someone at UGA. So that's going to be interesting too, to see you can make both sides of the argument there.
Absolutely. Kevin, you spent a lot of time down in SEC country. I remember when I lived in Florida, the pro sports imprint there is not real big. Outside of the Dolphins, I don't know if there's a huge fan base for any other pro team in Florida, but the Gators, the Seminoles, the Hurricanes, they rule that state. And much of the South, as Elton said, much of the South is the same way. There might not even be a pro team in many of those states. Do you think geography will play a factor in all of this?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And especially in some of the SEC states that don't even have pro franchises. I do think now the Tampa area, with the emergence of the Rays and, the Lightning and the Bucks all having success, I think the Tampa area has become more of a pro area than a college area. but Orlando, Jacksonville, those are college cities. The Magic are floundering. And then when you take a look at South Florida, you do have the Dolphins influence there, but you also have the Hurricanes. And, some of the, even some of those other programs like FAU and FIU are starting to make a little bit more of an imprint there in the last 20 years. So Florida is kind of a fascinating state. It's a growing state. I think when I moved there in 1989, there was 7 million population. Now it's like 21 million, so it's tripled in size. So I think there's a lot of money to go around in that state, but I think certainly a lot of the colleges are definitely going to benefit within that state with this new legislation.
One of the things, Elton, just from our conversation so far here, there are so many unknowns, and you can kind of take both sides of a lot of these arguments. Is this really something that we have no idea how this is going to play out?
I think so. We kind of talked about it for so long, just as a collective of getting these athletes, a chance to kind of monetize off their likeness. And now that it's here, it's kind of like, it's going to kind of be like the Wild West. I think at first, until, we just had more experience with it. I think it's going to it could create a whole new industry in itself, for people in our industry with covering the name, image, and likeness beats. There'll be books written about this. I think it's fascinating, and it's a new day and age with college athletics.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more to come on this. I'm sure it's going to be a story to follow out throughout the year. Let's do a little bit of on-field, on-court action. The other big announcement in Big Ten country, of course, we got the matchups for the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Kevin, IU and Purdue, what's your take on their matchups?
Yeah, IU going to Syracuse, the Carrier Dome. It's always a tough environment there. Mike Woodson, a first-year coach, shooting in a dome with a team that traditionally has not shot well. We'll get an early test to see if Woodson's recruits and transfers they brought in can shoot and handle a road environment. So I think it's going to be pretty good. Purdue, meanwhile, hosts FSU. That's going to be a really good matchup. Purdue is pretty loaded in terms of bringing back. I just looked this up. They're bringing back 94% of their scoring from last year. All 5 starters with the decision of Travion Williams to come back. They're going to be one of the favorites to win the Big Ten this year. And you're bringing in a Florida State team that did have some losses. Scotty Barnes is probably going to go in the first round of the NBA draft. So I think that Purdue will probably be favored in that game, but Leonard Hamilton's an excellent coach, and he does always get talent. So you never know what's going to happen come late November when they play at Mackey Arena.
Yeah, now how about Penn State preparing for the U?
Yeah, that's an interesting. I know Penn State fans are finally glad it's an opponent other than Virginia Tech. We'll see how how that works out for them. But Penn State actually, I believe Virginia Tech was ranked 10th in the nation last year when they traveled down there to Blacksburg, and they got the victory. So, but no, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. Michael Shrewsbury, it's obviously his first year in town. He was able to get some guys to stick around, and Seth Lundy, John Hare, Miles Dredd. He's got some transfer guys he pulled in. So it should be an exciting, fun matchup. Miami's a good team. Kevin, I'm sure you're well aware of that, the things that they possess. But I'm excited for that one. I think Penn State, Miami in basketball is going to be fun. And Penn State also plays LSU in basketball right after Thanksgiving in the Emerald Coast Classic. So a good SEC, ACC slate for them.
Maybe they can get Vinny Testaverde to show up in fatigues for that game. We'll throw back there.
Remember how that turned out, right?
That's always great. Yeah, exactly. That's always a lot of fun. The Fiesta Bowl, 6 interceptions too. That's when I first discovered Vinny was colorblind, right?
As you look at the rest of those matchups, anything else stick out to you? Any of the other games in this series, either one of you, that people should look forward to?
Well, farewell tour for Coach K. He's going to be in Columbus, Duke, Ohio State. And then you've got Michigan, North Carolina, I think will be a really good matchup because, Juwan Howard, even though they lost Franz Wagner, Hunter Dickinson is probably going to come back, and they've got an excellent freshman class coming in. So that should be a really good marquee matchup down in Chapel Hill in the Dean Dome.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to that Michigan-North Carolina matchup as well. That's the one that really jumped out at me as being exciting. So I like this. I like when they do this every year. We get these teams that do not meet unless it's in the tournament or one of these invitationals. I think it's fun. But yeah, Michigan, North Carolina is the one that I'm really looking forward to outside of the Penn State, Miami, of course.
No doubt. Great event every year, and I'm sure we'll be looking forward to that as we move on. Guys, thanks a lot for your time. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Take care.
Thanks as always to Elton and Kevin. You can follow Elton and the Penn State Nittany Lions at EHDC12. You can follow Kevin and the Indiana Hoosiers at Kevin Brockway G1. Now let's get a national perspective. Check in with our national columnist, Clay Horning. All right, now we're checking in with Clay Horning. And Clay, the big news this week in the college realm, obviously concerning the name, image, and likeness situation. I know there's been a deadline. We kind of talked about this earlier with Elton and Kevin. There's been a deadline coming up. The NCAA's known about it for a while now. 10 states getting ready to go forward with that legislation on Thursday. The NCAA finally this week stepped in, put a little bit of a structure in place. There's a long way to go. We obviously don't know what the ramifications of this are, but I guess from my perspective, it was good to see them finally take a baby step towards something that they've known about for more than a year. What's your take on all this?
Well, my take is I don't have much sympathy for the NCAA on gender equity issues. I don't have much sympathy for the NCAA and letting programs remain in probation purgatory for months and years, and it doesn't make any sense to me. But I mean, you may be correcting me, but essentially, I think the NCAA said, all right, or is going to say, all right, live within the law of the states if you live in one of those states. If not, we encourage the institutions themselves in other states to create their own, and I'm going to put this in quotes, rules, and they'll just go from there. And I feel like that the common refrain from people like us that might write opinion pieces or whatever has been, well, for decades they've been out of touch. They've had the opportunity to get out in front of this. I don't know how they get in front of this. Because as far as I can tell, the laws that have been passed that are going into effect in several states are basically saying you are allowed to make money off your name, image, and likeness. They are not. That is not a regulation. This is what you can do. That's not. You can only take it this far, and I think the NCAA has been caught in between. To get ahead of this is to regulate it and make it, all one thing and work within certain parameters. But I don't know if they understood this or just were too afraid to face it or whatever. But if they said, all right, we'll allow this, even if this was a lot, I still don't see how they're still not in the same position of how can you limit? It's a capitalist country. We are saying these are adults. They're all 18 or older, and whatever. So I just see it as the Wild West right now. And now you have a booster. He owns a supermarket. He wants you to do an autograph signing. He pays you $100,000 for an hour. I don't see how that's not allowed. And the only way I see it sort of, and now it's unseemly, and the institutions themselves would say, I don't know, or I don't think so. But kids may end up being suspended for breaking team rules, and these are the rules. You may only be able to regulate it on the team itself, and the coaches are telling you what you can do and what you can't do. But
yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned Wild West because Elton Hayes used the same term. And I think that's part of this whole thing. We don't know really how this is going to evolve. And I've seen the NCAA trying to say, Well, the schools themselves can't be involved. So, how are you going to define that? Like you were talking about a booster, if he's acting on his own, or she, if they're acting on their own, where does that definition fall? Where does the limit of a school setting it up go? And then it sounds like, at least the early versions of this, with what the NCAA came out with this week, they're actually asking the schools to get involved. So I don't know. I think it's a crazy situation.
Well, it's crazy, but I don't know how it isn't. And it's sort of like, and the way I see it regulating over time is something along the lines of, well, if you spend all your time making money off your name, image, and likeness, and you're not very good to the team, well, you don't need to be on this team any longer. And suddenly your value and your name, image, and likeness takes a nosedive. And so there will be this push and this pull, and there will be some student athletes who are really good with their time and maintain everything they need to maintain and do this simultaneously and aren't a distraction to their team, and they'll flourish. But I mean, aside, I'm a poker player. I do okay in the game. I want to say that. I'm not a degenerate gambler. But anyway, I watched the blogs of Andrew Nemi and Brad Owen, which are poker players who will hear this will recognize those names. They created their own YouTube thing. They have hundreds of thousands of people watch them. So when does an athlete walk in and begin recording stuff in the locker room? Well, they probably won't allow that. Well, who won't allow it? I mean, you can be suspended on your team, yes, but I mean, the NCAA is not going to come down on you. The law is not going to come down on you. Who wouldn't want to know what goes on in the locker room in unguarded moments? Now an athlete can do that and can put it on YouTube. Would we want to see that? I don't know. And another thing I thought about was we would tend to think this would favor the blue bloods, the Alabamas, the Oklahomas. As I typed some of that in, I wondered, who do we still consider blue bloods? But Florida, perhaps. Anyway, and I thought, who's the most exciting college football player since I've been working at the transfer, which is about 25 years now. And I thought of Randy Moss at Marshall. And so you find that star somewhere where he's not supposed to be. And I remember when MAC games were sort of taking over the world on Wednesdays in like 2001 or whatever. And Roethlisberger at Miami of Ohio. And so it's not going to be what we think it's going to be, is what I'm trying to say. It's not necessarily going to be the quarterback at Alabama. It may be the guy on the underdog team that runs circles around those guys, and the whole nation, gets behind him, not just his fan base. And to say nothing of, we will also find, I used to always say, you can't pay him, because you generate the money in football and maybe basketball, but you don't generate it in rowing and golf and tennis, and you've got to treat them the same. Well, there will be rowers and golfers and tennis players that figure this thing out too, and in their own ways create, interesting Twitter accounts and interesting YouTube channels and whatnot. We can't imagine is what I'm trying to get at.
No, you're right. And there's some of that's popped up. I know when Michael Pittman got drafted here in Indianapolis, he had and still has a vlog that he did on YouTube, and he went inside the USC locker room at times. And it was to show like their pregame meals and things like that. And I'm sure he had to get permission from the school to do that. I know there's a lot of athletes out there who are, documenting their journey on Instagram, and now these things can be monetized, and it'll be interesting to see what the market value for that is. I thought one thing that's very interesting, though, and what you were talking about, to some degree, there's going to be natural guidelines here, natural limits put on, because, the teams themselves are going to have rules, but ultimately the market will dictate this, right? I mean, if it's worth whatever someone's willing to pay.
That's right. And we may see some athletes that sort of come in. Let me kill that. Come in as freshmen and make a killing, but it distracts them. They're not the same, and they become this. What's the word? This tale that teaches us what to do and not do. And this is an aside, but it plays into all this, and I'll mention it, that there was a center at OU when Bob Stoops became the coach named Matt O'Neill, and he famously went home during the summers and came back, but still was a standout center. And I just thought, in the quaint world where athletes would go home for summer and come back, or voluntary workouts were actually voluntary, and all, you might have been able to maintain sort of the bubble that college sports took place in. But no, we had to have an arms race. We had to pay coaches $4 to $7 to $8 to $10 million. We had to sort of do everything that we would have thought was antithetical to college sports, say 50 or 70 years ago. Probably by the 1970s, it was we might have been able to see where it was going. But you can't even imagine a player now that plays and goes home and works in a family business for a summer, and we're getting near to the point where you can't imagine, a 4 or 5 star prospect who's signed actually going to high school for his 8th semester. And it's just, and I struggle with all of that. Just as I struggle with, I always thought, can't pay the football players if you're not going to pay the rowers. And we should probably mention, none of this is paying to play. And everybody who ever said they make billions off the backs of these kids for what they're playing and get nothing back, you can still make that argument. This 5-star athlete is socially awkward. He doesn't do so well with the name, image, and likeness. Why is he getting left behind? So it's hard to, and at the same time, it's hard to imagine, other than absolutely playing your sport, it seems like everything else can be thrown into name. Like, can you sell the cleats that you wore during the game? Well, your school might have a problem with that, but I don't think that you're going to get charged with a crime for doing it. And who wouldn't want a collector's item like that? It doesn't have your name, image, or likeness on it, but you wore them, so it's intrinsic. So I don't see where it ends, but I do see this will be one of those, we like to think we live in a market economy in this country. It's actually a mixed economy, and there's a lot of regulation, and a lot of people get subsidies, and a lot of people get tax code, get favors. We may see the market play out in a very pure way in this, which could be interesting, and given everything, might even be the quickest way to get a handle on it.
It might just be.
But it's still nothing we can imagine. I guess that's my last sentence.
No, I think I absolutely agree with you. I think this story is just beginning to be told. It's going to evolve over the next years and decade, and it's going to definitely be something that's going to be interesting to watch. And it all starts here this week. Well, Clay, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll check in again with you in a couple of weeks.
All right, see ya.
Thanks again to Clay. You can follow our national columnist on Twitter @Clay Horning, and thanks again to all of you. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.